Hi and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming and joining us for this artist talk that's connected to the exhibition Life Interwoven, and hopefully you've seen the work outside this beautiful theater, but you also see individual images projected behind us. I'm especially excited not to participate in this and to be invited, and feel very honored. Not just because the Legacy Lab and also Life Interwoven connects to my own practice, but because it's a great opportunity for me to reconnect with all of you, because I met you for the first time 6 months ago during the Legacy Lab, and I presented my work to you and got a little glimpse into your process and into your practice and ideas and how you work with family archives. And so before we start today's conversation, it would be great if everybody could just introduce themselves real quickly and maybe say 1 or 2 sentences about the projects that they developed during Legacy Day. So maybe I hand the mic over to you.
Hi, I'm Felicia Wilson, and my project, my story, was a story of my family starting in Edisto Island, South Carolina, and coming to New York City.
Hi everyone, my name is Sofie Vasquez. I'm an artist and a photographer from the Bronx, and my project that I developed at Legacy Lab was focused on my aunt Eugenia and her story and legacy within my family history, and kind of like tackling, the family archive that we sometimes neglect.
Hi everybody, my name is Danny Aros. I did a photo transfer about my aunt as well, who was the first immigrant from our family to come to America, and and the parallels that has with my own diaspora.
Hi everyone, my name is Yeline Del Carmen, and for the Legacy Lab, I decided to highlight a lot of the birthdays of my family member, mixing it with my playful art practice that's a bit more experimental.
Good evening everyone, my name is Alexis Marie Montoya. I'm a visual artist and writer. My series is entitled Honey, and in a nutshell, it's my interpretation of what I think about my legacy. So it is a video piece, a collage, and then 3 tiny, Polaroid transfers of some photos that I made my dad do, and you'll see that in the video that will be playing behind me.
So if we dive into the heart of the Legacy Lab itself, what drew you first to participate? And your experience, how did it shape your Legacy Lab experience? How did it shape your project? And was there a moment in the summer where something shifted for you?
So I joined the Legacy Lab project because I wanted to learn more about the best way to preserve all the things that we have in our family archive. It's mostly photos for me and some items, and I wanted to know the best way to keep those things and to share them. And being a part of this project really got me thinking about a story and the idea that our photos do tell a story. So when the opportunity came to do the exhibit, I had to think about what story I wanted to tell. And I wanted to tell the story of my family who came here during the Great Migration, and that was the story that I wanted to tell. So from where they started up to where we are now, because if you look at the photos, it starts with the people who came over in the 40s, and it ends with me and my children who are here now. So that during this project, the idea of storytelling really became important to me.
I just want to follow up a little bit, Felicia. In your installation, you used different kinds of frames, and I was just curious because when I look at the details, I'm always drawn to like the backgrounds, and I do see that in some of the backgrounds there are also frames standing up on furniture or they are mounted on the walls, and I was wondering if you reference the installation of your work somewhat, if it's mirroring some of your, I guess, childhood experience or the way photography was celebrated in your family.
It is, because for me, I thought of the installation as being in my family's living room, and how we all grew up in a home and seeing photos. And those photos were always in different frames. If you think about, you go to your aunt's house, your grandmother's house, and you have all these photos and they are in different frames. They don't look like a museum where everything looks exactly the same. So when I chose the frames, I wanted frames that I felt went with each picture. So I was really purposeful about what I chose, because I wanted it to have that feeling of, yes, you're looking at this installation, but you feel like you're sitting you're seeing pictures that are in your home or your grandmother's home or your aunt's home. So that was really purposeful for me.
Thank you. I also love that you brought your photo album, and that we actually see the container where you collected some of these old photographs. So this is very amazing. I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit. Otherwise, I would just move on, and maybe we can come back to that also.
So this is actually, I got into photos because of my mom. She kept photos, and they were in an envelope or a box, and I wanted to put them into an album. And when I was a kid, she actually bought this album for me, and we sat down and we put all these photos together. So I've kept this all these years. So when I came to the Legacy Project, these were the photos that I was thinking of that I wanted to preserve, plus thinking about other photos that other family members would have. And so when I went to tell my story, this was the book that I went to. But this I kind of consider my start in getting interested in photos and photography. I'm not a photographer, but as a kid, as a teenager, as an adult, I'm always the person who's always taking pictures. You can always ask my kids, they're like, Mom, why are you always taking pictures? And for me, that's the way that you keep memories. That's the way that you pass memories down. To me, that's really, really important. But this was the start of it, because looking at these gave me a window of seeing family members and how they looked, how they used to dress, what they looked like before I came along. So that was really a big interest of mine.
Thank you. Felicia, I want to continue with you. Sophie, sorry. Sophie, you say, I think on the website you say documentary practice is about preserving histories as well as recording new chapters. And I was curious, did the Legacy Lab spark something similar to you? And how did you decide which are the images that you want to show and include in the exhibition or work with? And also what preservation means to you in this context?
So I would say I was drawn to the Legacy Lab because, well, one, I love Foco, and I love the Bronx Arts Factory where we did the workshops, but also a lot of my work that I do primarily as a photographer and an archivist as well, I've always focused on my family. Ever since I began photography since 2018, it's always just been focusing on my mother's side of my family and documenting them. And I've done that for a very long time, and when I went to the lab, I was kind of faced at like this fork in the road of like, well, how much further can I go with my mom's archive? And one person in my family that I kind of skirted around was my Aunt Eugenia, who, she had left home at about 17 years old, and she started a new life for herself that conclude of me never getting the chance to meet her as an adult. I did meet her as a baby, but I have no memory of it. And unfortunately, she passed before I could meet her. And so she's always kind of been a black sheep of the family. And I really wanted to challenge myself of wanting to dig through photographs. I know you had asked like which photographs to choose, and quite frankly, it was which photographs did I have? Because, you know, looking for photos of Eugenia, there's like one photograph of her that's always been it's become one of like iconography for her high school prom photo. It's the only photo I've ever seen of her that's in the house. And I was really digging to just find whatever I could have available, like in photo albums in my grandmother's shoebox, you know, taking photos out of frames I've never been unattached before, just because these photos have kind of just sat in a corner, I felt. Like it wasn't like she was buried, but she was kind of just placed quietly. So me going digging into these photos, asking questions, do you have photos of Eugenia? Or, you know, people are like, why are you asking about Eugenia all of a sudden? You know, it's not her birthday, it's not the anniversary of her death. Like, you know, it's August. Why are you asking about her so much? And I think with like preserving history, I've learned is that, you know, I was learning the skill sets. Like I no longer keep my photographs in like direct sunlight. That's good. But also, one challenge of this was text and talking to people. You know, what that meant, and, you know, having people talk about her again, not in these two dates, her death and birthday. Like, what do you remember from her? What can you tell me about her? Like, you know, at the exhibition, my cousins came and they didn't even know she existed because their father, my uncle, doesn't really like to talk about her. But they knew they had an aunt and they thought she was still alive. But I was the one who broke it to the exhibition. I'm like, no, like this is kind of like the history. And that's why I meant like making new chapters where I kind of have this role now with my other extended family of like getting to share Eugenia's legacy, but also like kind of us having to be able to talk more about her.
I was wondering, for somebody who doesn't know your family history or doesn't have access to this information, I feel like her presence, but then also her absence. So I can follow the character, and then I think, since you were talking about text and the use of text, and you're also a writer, correct? So I was wondering why I felt you let the images talk and the viewer connect the dots to whatever story they may find. I understand the importance for your family recollecting memories and sharing them and passing them down. But for an outsider, I think what's very powerful is the cyanotype that you included, and then also the verso of like one of the photographs, and it makes it very ambiguous. And I just wondered if that's intentional and why you didn't include anything.
Yeah, so ironically, the original concept I had was going to be more text heavy, almost like a photo diary with lots of text. But interesting enough, around the same time, I was in a playwriting fellowship by accident, and that does happen. And I wrote a play about Eugenia and kind of an experience I had with another family member talking about her. And so all that text I kind of collected went into that individual project, but with the cyanotype and where she writes, "I love you, Mom," like that's Eugenia's writing. Like that's what she wrote behind that photograph, and I made sure I wanted it to be a diptych. And I felt like that was it was Eugenia's way of her text. It was a way of showing a little bit of her visually. And then the writing of like her full name, like that was my grandmother. Like the photograph is in that little quadrant tip of her baby, like from my grandmother being pregnant to her, you know, my mom and my uncle meeting her for the first time. I was trying to be very deliberate with, if there was going to be text included in that, I wanted it from text that had been written within the family or by Eugenia herself. And to my knowledge, that would be the only text that would be the only thing I would have written by her at like 4 or 5 years old. I won't have any. I don't have access, or I don't think there is a record of her future writing. So that cyanotype diptych hits really hard because it's kind of like the only version of her that I have that almost feels very tangible. And I can kind of just like see, I felt like I can understand her thought process as a young girl, just like this is a photo going to her mom, and she knows that her mom carries lots of photos of them. And I feel like that was a way of still being able to include all the knowledge and writings and words I've learned about her in that very more metaphysical way.
Thank you. Maybe I want to also ask a little bit on the other end, starting with Alexis maybe, how did you source your images, and when you grew up, did you always see those images? Did you have to search for them? How did they come together for this project?
Yeah, so when I first started the course, I did task my entire family with looking through their archives. I gave them a deadline. I was like, you guys gotta get these super SCP. And basically what I did was work with what they gave me. Interestingly though, the one, I guess like box that I really focused on was one that belonged to my late mother. And my gosh, she had so many photo albums, not only of life when I was here, but when she was a young kid and right before me and when my brother was born. So I naturally like focused more on that box, I guess, because it was more interesting. It was, I've never seen those photo albums before, and yeah, that's where, yeah, I decided to focus.
So it was like the process was also a process of discovery, like old stories and what happened. It wasn't something that you necessarily knew about until you unpacked. Is that true?
Correct. Yeah, it was a lot of. I spent a lot of time looking through everything, and it was really interesting to piece together what was very much her history, things that I didn't know about her. I even saw just like some really early photos of my entire immediate family. And it allowed me to ask questions, ask them, like I saw a photo of my grandmother very young working in a diner, and I was like, where was this? Where were you doing this? And she gave me a full story. There was a lot of photos out in like, parks, in Pelham Bay Park in particular, and so I was just very surprised and happy that looking through that box made me also prompt my family to tell them more of our history. So.
Similar to what Sofie was just saying, that it became collaborative in the sense that it was collaborative storytelling, and you just sourced those memories and images to make your project. Yeah, awesome. Yeline, maybe you want to say how you sourced your images and where they came from, and whether you always had them, whether they were framed already, or you looked at them constantly, or you had to dig them out somewhere.
Yeah, so my mom is a very emotional hoarder. She carries pretty much everything that our family and like our immediate siblings had growing up. So she keeps all our photos in like a Looney Tunes Tweety blue bag in a closet, where you also keep like your emergency documents and stuff. So I've always had access to those photos, and I always knew that they existed. And even when I decided to highlight the birthdays in my family, that was always something that was very important to us growing up. My mom always showed up and celebrated us to the full capacity that she can for that specific day. So it was very clear for me that I wanted to highlight that and share nostalgia around birthdays and family gatherings since like day one of the workshop series.
Thank you. I want to transition into another theme maybe, and it's about translating intimacy into form. And so one of the most striking parts of this exhibition is the range of textures and materials and collage and photography and food-centered storytelling as well. But Danny, you mentioned transformation, I guess, in your, I love the QR codes, and that you can jump like on your phone like straight to the website and get a little more information. And I think you talk about transformation, and I noticed like the the mark making and the residue of like different images and symbols, like the flag and money, and also your use of color. And I was wondering if you can speak a little more about those symbols and the use of color.
Yeah, totally. I think my practice in itself has been very fragmented. For a period of time, I think until this last year at the end of this workshop, I always felt like I couldn't figure out who I was as an artist. There wasn't one way to present myself where everybody can see what I do or what it is that I do, because I don't even know it. And I've come to terms with it, and I think it's okay, and I think it's fine. I was always searching for a way to step away from to find a different way to make things a little bit more tactile for myself, so I can feel more connected to what I'm making. So I started photographing around the pandemic, but I went back home, and I grew up with all these images. It's not a lot of images, it's about a shoebox worth of images that we brought over from Colombia. And so I grew up with all these photos, and I remember all these instances, but there was always a level of resentment just based on the fact that my family was very evangelical, and still are, proud members of the church. And so you grew up thinking that there's something wrong with you. So for me, this was kind of like a cathartic way to be able to use my hands and to use different materials like the gold leaf or the photo transfer of the dollar, the cityscape before 9/11, which was when we first came to America. Use all these different pieces of memory to kind of come to terms with what was, which was leaving my homeland and coming to the States. And also just processing the fact that why do people have to migrate? You know, it's the fact that you are being pushed away from your country, but also there's always that idea of like going to get paid in dollars rather than what they make it over here. A lot of people make their money here and they go back home. The flag is actually yellow because I wanted to intervene the whiteness of the American flag and the colors of the Gran Colombia, which was Venezuela, Ecuador, and Colombia, used to be are yellow, blue, and red. So I wanted to surpass the whiteness of it, add the yellowness of just three countries of migration. And the memory of my aunt, which was the first person that came to America. She lived in New Jersey, West New Jersey, New York for a long period of time, for all of her life, mostly. And she recently passed away. And it was a way for me to not only let go, but also get closer, become closer with my own family. And then there's a red thread in it too, because I don't know, I just felt that there had to be something to weave me into the story. Mm-hmm. The photo that's on there is my 5th grade photo, and I think that was the year of 9/11, 2001. And it just came together because that was the first photo that I got, that was taken of me when I came to the States.
Actually,
I didn't know I had a New York t-shirt on there, but yeah, she's trying to say I grew up in
one of my questions was about that small photograph. When I looked at it, and sort of, I'm an immigrant as well, and I was looking at the stitching and how you chose to attach this photograph, sort of like not an afterthought, it's almost like the final piece, and I felt, I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but I thought, I was thinking about repair, scarring, patching, like those kind of words came to mind. I was thinking if that came also to your mind, or?
No, definitely. It was very intentional. I think also that's why the photo transfer, because the whole piece is a photo transfer. But I didn't do a single photographic transfer. I did letter size transfers and then connected them all with a thread, just to resemble kind of like the sentiment that I actually feel, which is like trying to figure out parts and pieces of like where you are, who you are, where you come from, so you know where you're going.
And the other thing that also may be my interpretation, because I'm also, like some of the marks were like, for me, were not just residue, but they felt like erasure marks, and I'm not sure if you're also talking about visibility and hiding and secrecy and those themes maybe, perhaps.
Yeah, they're definitely meant to feel like traces. Like, it's like when you remember a memory, but you only remember pieces of it. So it's like a fingerprint. So that's what I love so much about the photo transfer, that you're never gonna get a perfect one. You know, there's gonna be that feeling of yourself in it.
And then I want to bring it back, so thank you, this is great. I want to talk a little more about materials and processes and also collaboration. I want to bring it back to Yeline and your playful use of materials, the colors, the frames, and sort of like the celebration of birthday parties, not just of the parties, but maybe also around making. And you mentioned that your birthday cakes were made by a friend of the family, and I also want to lead into like ideas of collaboration and what are these materials and how did it come all together?
Yeah, so the physical making of the frames was done with the help of a family friend, Esmeralda. She's been making cakes literally all her life, and my mom and her have been friends for like a really long time. She came over to the house like 2 or 3 weekends and would teach me how to pipe, and then me having like a more visual art background, I would like mix the colors to get the right shade. So it definitely took some back and forth and a lot of teaching and learning. And I think it also ties to the physical event of creating a birthday. My mom would ask a neighbor for something, and like a family friend would provide something. She's been a babysitter all her life, so she would always have like her door open to everyone, and it would be a very collaborative effort. But the physical making of the frames was definitely a team project.
How much control did you have? What are the materials? Because when I look at the colors and I look at the frames, they look so delicious, yet they don't have a scent. They have the color, like you want to just taste them, but they're not the actual.
Yeah, so the frames are made out of plaster. So it's usually what I went to like the ferreteria, the department store to get that, and then I used acrylic paint, and then some of the styrofoam and like the confetti that you see I bought from the dollar store, which also reminds me of the decorations that you see in some of the photos, or like the confetti that's falling on like my sister and I's head, because my mom would shop often at like the 99-cent store to get decorations for the birthdays.
When I come, so I'm based in Brooklyn. When I come to the Bronx, and I don't know, that's also me just being like awed by like sometimes like parts of the Bronx where I'm like, wow, time does, although there's a lot of gentrification and all these big buildings, but I do see a lot of cake shops, and I was wondering if this is also a celebration of like the Bronx and cake shops and women, and if this is part of, you know, you talked about your family friend, yourself, your mom. Just curious about that connection to being like
Yeah, honestly, I didn't think much about that when creating the pieces, but context is always very important. So given the fact that I live in the Bronx, I work in the Bronx, my family was raised in the Bronx, a lot of the shops that we shop at are also predominantly women-owned. It makes sense. So I think because I'm in it, I wasn't necessarily thinking like, oh, all of these other factors trickle down and do influence the work that I make. But it definitely makes sense.
And then, Alexis, I put both of you together at the end because I was mentioning earlier, I was like, oh, yes, the sweet work goes together. So, the title Honey, when I think about honey, I think about like a lot of, like I think about something wholesome, something, you know, that is comforting when it's cold out, and something sweet and sticky. How did you come up with the title? Yeah, maybe we said.
Yeah, so in the video piece that I'm interpreting, legacy, is like I see it as a very sweet thing, but also very sticky. I see how when you think about family history, you know, it's not all pleasant. There's a lot of players, there's a lot of bees that are involved in the process of creating honey. So I was thinking just all these different ways that honey could be an amazing vehicle to talk about legacy, but exactly that. As I was creating these pieces, all I kept saying was, yeah, my legacy is sweet and it is sticky, and it was the perfect, ingredient to focus on for my work.
I'm not sure if this also ties to the larger community of the Bronx and the, you know, the stickiness and the sweetness in the community, and maybe that's also too far-fetched, but I was wondering if how you think about it.
Yeah, well, and it's an interesting question because the Bronx I feel like is very core to a lot of my work. I was born and raised here, I'm still here. I guess in a way it could also apply to that as well. I think I leave it up to interpretation. Yeah.
Okay. I noticed that some of the faces in your collage were covered, and I'm not sure if this shields privacy or if it's also an invitation for viewers to project their own story into your narrative.
Exactly that. I like to employ that in a lot of my work because I want there to be some sense of familiarity, although I make sure to keep my parents visible because I think they were very important as I think about legacy, but everyone featured in my collage is a relative. It's my grandmother's, my grandfather's, their parents. But yeah, the intention of hiding the eyes because there's so much life and so much personality behind it is to at least try to give someone an entry to understanding or even just like relating to the piece.
So then, working with all these materials that I also want to talk about, did the materials kind of like, where did it start? Did it start with like the honey and the materials and the gold and the idea of honey, or how did it all come together? What was like more spontaneous and intuitive and maybe you can speak about that.
Yeah, exactly that. I feel like my process is that, very spontaneous. I try to go into a process of creation without thinking too much about all of the elements I can throw into this because legacy is such a massive concept and there's so many ways to start. But I know at least the challenge for me was to still incorporate food because that is central to my entire practice. And so as I was creating this piece, I do source my images from magazines. So part of that process is flipping through those magazines, seeing what I'm drawn to. Also looking at the photos that I scanned and printed, seeing what worked with what I had available to me. Eventually I started seeing more and more imagery of honey, which is so odd because these magazines that I have flipped through them hundreds of times already. But I just felt very drawn to all of the elements that did it. They also seem to keep appearing and keep coming to me. So yeah, it was a very intuitive, spontaneous process.
Last questions about the three pieces that extend the frame. How did you choose them? Who are the photographs that are attached to them?
So all of the pieces feature my dad in some way. One is a framed piece of him that is in this like gold heart frame that once belonged to my mom. One is of him kissing me when I was a baby, and then one is of him feeding my mother. Again, very drawn to these photos, and after I put it together, after I made him put it together, I realized that I think my goal is to try to represent my dad and his sweet side. I think that the men in my family generally like to appear very macho, very strong and tough, and I don't cry and I don't have feelings, but I wanted to take the opportunity to at least allow myself to control the narrative of my legacy, and I wanted to present him in these very loving situations because that's how I want to remember him. And I think what was important in developing all of the work was that I do have control over that narrative of my legacy, and that's what I wanted to remember, and that's what I want my legacy to represent, is that sweetness behind my dad. Yeah.
Great, thank you. I was wondering how we can, and we already spoke, or some of you mentioned how this all ties into the Bronx as a site of memory and legacy, and if there is like a specific location in the Bronx, parks, some of you mentioned 99-cent stores. Is there any specific specific location that emerges from your project, or that inspired you, or that you keep coming back to, or that is part of your project? Maybe I start with Felicia.
I think a focus of a lot of the photos were homes, because that's where a lot of the photos were taking place. So for me, I think of the homes where the different places where my family members lived. So for the Bronx, a lot of some of the photos are from Co-op City. Some are in the Lower East Side. So some of them are the Bronx and some of them are different places. So it also kind of reflects the different places that my family lived throughout the years, the Bronx being one of them.
I saw there are like street pictures, maybe a school picture also. Is that correct? Or no? Am I getting this wrong? It's more like the interior. It was a little more like the record player, the home. So, Sofie, maybe.
Well, yeah, actually, for me, in my case, the house that I grew up in and currently am still living in is the same house that my mom grew up in as well, and her siblings, especially Eugenia, because they lived in Jerome Avenue when they first came here, and then by the time my mom was about 5, 6, and Eugenia was 1, and my uncle was born, the house that we're in today in Soundview is the house that, has housed everyone, so to say. So in some of the images of Eugenia, that's, the room that I sleep in is the room that she and my mom shared as well. So it's kind of interesting seeing the same space from almost like 50 years ago, how the front porch looks. How does, do we still have that statue of that horse, or we still have that globe in the background? So it's very tied to my history, because it's the home I literally grew up in, and how it's changed and how it's adapted, but there's still little fragments I can still see. Like this is the same window that my aunt and my family lived out there. This is the same bathroom we all went to. This is the same kitchen that we all cooked and ate our meals in. It's the same dining table. Like that has never moved. I know that the dining table has never moved from its spot, despite all the rearrangement and new furniture. That dining table is in that same exact spot, because that's the only space that we have for it. So I would say, like, in terms of like location and place in the Bronx, it's very personal to me as like in my home in Soundview. But also to a lot of I've always looked to my family since I started my practice as they were my only exposure to Ecuadorians in the Bronx, because I always felt like when it came to history about Ecuadorians who came here in the 1960s, what specific stories that they had, they were able to come here in the 1960s because there's more visas available. And so they're kind of, those photographs I have of the Grand Concourse in Jerome, it kind of expands a little further to kind of just, I always see my family as like a textbook, sort of way, of that kind of specific history in our culture. But it's very interesting to see in that wider scope, but at the same time it is very intimate and personal, where I'm able to live in a space where quite literally my family has lived in, and ideally I would want to continue my family there as well. I would want to have that space as an ancestral home.
Yeah, and then maybe also celebrating your family and the place. How do you envision either your project or the Legacy Lab work moving forward, and also for other, for the future communities or future generations, to be shared on the website, to be exhibited in a place, to become part of a living archive, part of the legacy of the Bronx, or
I know in a wider scope, there is because I also like to do 16 projects at the same time. So I am actively working on trying to document a lot of Ecuadorians who've immigrated to New York from and their stories. Because I feel like there's 3 big waves. You have the 1960s, 1990s, and now currently as well. Because I used to work in education, and a lot of my young kids in preschool, a lot of them are first-gen Ecuadorians, and they're 2nd graders, 3rd graders. And specifically in the Bronx, just, I'm biased. I love the Bronx. I'm from here, you know, it's just kind of, I mean, it's my home and it's something, or someone, I guess I personified the Bronx a bit, where it's always been a misunderstood and misrepresented home, but it's also been a safe haven for millions of people who have come here and made new lives for themselves and had to start from scratch. And, you know, again, using my family as my blueprint, you know, I think about, you know, starting over and what responsibilities does that take and what legacies do you make here? You know, it's interesting to me how my grandfather, you know, he's 86 now, we're 60 years apart. He was 60 when I was born, and you know, he told me, I was like, I just want to sell this house and go back to Ecuador. when I find out where he worked endlessly at like the Brooklyn Navy Yard to like buy this house. Like he picked up so many. My grandmother was working, and I think it's because a lot of them talk about like, oh, the Bronx has changed, and we don't want to live here anymore. But it's like, no, it's like there was something beautiful built here, and we've been let down by a lot of people, but the community itself is what picks itself up. And I think also our family legacies and our family, I guess the word determination is what keeps us going. Like I'm determined to stay in the Bronx. Like I am very determined. Like that family home that my grandfather worked endlessly for. And I've seen my family grow up from just my siblings to my mom and her siblings, you know. And I feel like I can kind of speak from this table, where I feel like we don't, you know, our artwork is our legacy, but it's also a testament to what our parents did and like their strengths and our own strengths in artistic ways. And I feel like that's just kind of like the big picture in a way with our artwork.
I think to me also, I mean, it sounded, when I first met you and you shared a little bit about the work that you were doing last summer, I felt when I came here, I had no community. I was just like, okay, I went to like study in New York, but there wasn't like a community that sort of like had my back, where I could like, I don't know, just like have friends or, you know, knock on the door, be welcomed, or, so when I listened to your stories, they felt, or the stories of your parents or the people that came here before you, that they had sort of a very supportive system in place. And I don't know if it's, you know, I came here in the late 90s, but this, if this is just the Bronx, or if it, you know, it felt so inspiring to me to hear this. And also right now, with our immigration politics and everything, it's so important to have this message and to just like say, we're here, we're still here, and we have that space. That space still exists. Should Danny, do you want to speak a little bit about the Bronx and what your work may mean to like a future generation, or to people who are just here and trying to find themselves as artists or
Yeah, definitely. So I was born in Colombia until the age of 9. Then I grew up in Tampa until I turned 19. And then with the $200 in my pocket that I had, I moved to the city. But it hasn't been until I got to the Bronx where I was able to find a community in the arts. I would have never been here if it wasn't for the help of the people of the Bronx arts community that have opened their doors and allowed me to and welcome me. I am a member of the BX Arts Factory, and through the factory was how I ended up participating in the workshop. For me, that piece in particular is very special because it just, for me, tells a trajectory. And what I wish anybody else that will see it later on is for them to know that life can be messy. Understand that there's a lot of parts of you, and that it's okay to take your time to figure that out. Thanks to the love and support of my husband, I've been able to like actually stay in uptown Manhattan and be able to participate as a member of creating art, but as an artist. But aside from that, it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle, but I'm really hoping to just continue to encourage and participate and be helpful in community engagement and bring art, especially to these communities that are always underserved. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just passing it down to Alexis. Maybe if you have like an advice to like a future Legacy Lab participant, or maybe something you want to share.
Definitely source your photos as soon as possible. And all your family members, the extended relatives. Yeah, I kind of wish I had a little more to work with. So that's one. And two, to not underestimate the scanning process. That was a day and a half of just, wow. It was a lot. What else? And also to be open to interpreting how archiving looks to the individual. My work feels like a little bit of a departure from a lot of the works in that, I did a lot. The collage was my typical format, but even venturing into video, in fact, you very much inspired me to take that up. This is the first video piece I ever created. So I think my advice would be to think outside the box as far as the medium that could interpret the archives and also legacy as well.
Did anyone collaborate with any cultural archives or historical archives in the Bronx or in New York in general to pull into your stories? Yes.
Not necessarily an archive, but I want to Google. I found a very specific, like the photo of the city is a photo that I wanted to from that specific period because that was the period that was important to me to present in this piece. But no, unfortunately, I didn't probably go the proper way about doing it. But yeah, I definitely wanted that over.
I'm just remembering my first, actually, although I'm based in Brooklyn, my first real breakthrough was at the AIM program. I was participating in the Bronx AIM program, and this was my first, like, plugging me into like professional development, making connections, building a network of artists. So the Bronx also has done something to me really important in my becoming an artist and arriving where I'm.
I just wanted to ask the artists if they're keeping in mind sort of the evolving cultural landscape. Because the Bronx at one point was very Jewish, and then it was very Irish, and now you have such a blend of culture. You have Little Yemen, you have, what all of you are capturing, and especially Sofie's work on the Ecuadorian immigration, and your work as well. The Bronx could look completely different 50 years from now. So my question is, are you keeping that in mind? And secondly, just a personal reflection. I was born in the Bronx, and then my parents moved out, and then I came back to the Bronx in my coming of age years, in like my 12, 13, and I'm Salvadoran, but coming to the Bronx and, it's just Dominicans and Puerto Ricans around me was a little hard, because I look Dominican. People often confuse me as Dominican, and because I also speak Spanish, I picked up, speaking in that, in the Dominican way, right? But that's not me. I grew up eating pupusas. I didn't grow up eating, mofongo or anything like that. So I just wanted to kind of share that that's what resonates with me is, finding these, all of you were finding these pockets of community and culture in your family, that with your culture that resonates with you and also part of the larger Bronx. So that's just my question and comment.
Does anybody else have, does anybody want to respond? Yes.
So part of the photos that I highlighted were actually taken in Dominican Republic, and then the other half are here in the Bronx. And honestly, everything that we've participated in, or even the space that we take up here in Highbridge, has always had, there were always families of immigrants and immigrants even within our building, or even sometimes during the warmer months we would move our birthday parties out in the local park. We used to be in La Valley all the time, and my mom has always worked for the local school, which was again lots of immigrants in that building. But I think it's always interesting to see the traditions that are transnational and what we choose to celebrate, or even the birthday cakes. They were often bought at Dominican bakeries, and if it wasn't Dominican bakery, it was probably another Latino bakery around the area. And even the restaurants that we would do catering, or the patelitas that we would buy, or like the juices that we would buy, were definitely Dominican or like family owned. So I think it's always interesting to see what we gravitate towards and what feels familiar. And I think for the little pocket of the Bronx that I live in, we've always find those threads. And I think thinking about my legacy and thinking about what I'm keeping alive, it's definitely those like nostalgic things that sometimes remind me of Dominican Republic, but now we're here in the Bronx and seeing what we still have and are still participating in.
I would say that one of the big things that I take from this, and I would say to anybody doing the Legacy Lab, is that we all have a story. Everybody has a story, and we don't think of it that way, but we all have a story, and we all have a history, and we're all making history every day. And this is a way of documenting that, because when we think of the Bronx, there's always the story of the Bronx is this, and the Bronx is, it doesn't always have the best reputation, and the crime and this, then, and that's what they highlight. But we are proof of those stories that are the stories that are not out there. So I would encourage anybody to do this program, because it makes you really think about your story, because we all have one, and that's not always what is out there in the larger world, and especially in the times that we're living in, where a lot is just, let's be honest, trying to be erased. We have to basically take that stand that we don't need other people to tell our stories. We're going to tell our stories.
Hi guys, congratulations for you. Felicia, when we were working together, you discovered one of your can you guys Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great, sorry. So Felicia, during the process of our workshop, you discovered one of your family photos online in a place that you had never seen it before. Can you tell us what it felt like to not own a piece of your history in the context of the Legacy Lab, and in the moment that we are in sort of together?
Yes. So a big part of my archive, the first picture that's there is a picture of my grandmother and my cousin. And it is the only picture that exists of my grandmother. And we did not take the picture. The picture was actually taken by a photographer for Time Life magazine back in the 50s or the 60s. The way that I found the photo, I saw it on Facebook. And I didn't know what my grandmother looked like, but I knew that this lady, I was like, oh, there's something about her. I knew that the photo was taken in my family's hometown, but I didn't know who she was. And I guess the photo was then reshared about 3 months later in a group that we have based on the history of that hometown. And my cousin, who's in the group, posted, oh, that's my grandmother and that's me. So that's how I found out that that was my grandmother. So, didn't have the picture. It's actually a part of a famous magazine's archive. And so when I was doing this project and deciding that I wanted to tell my story, that I had to have that photo because this was where it all started. And then finding out that even though that is my family member, I don't own the rights to that. And I don't have the right to do anything with it. And I actually have to pay someone else to use that photo. And we reached out to them and told them that this was a small community project and were willing to pay them, what we thought would be a reasonable licensing fee. And they came back with what was not a reasonable licensing fee. And we went back to them and said, and Oscar wrote a great, appeal to them, and they did not really care. So it was very disheartening to realize that this thing that I wanted to use, I really didn't have the legal right to use it. Even though it is my family member, and one of the family members that's in the photo is still alive. She's passed on, but my family member who is alive is in that photo, but does not own the rights to his own image. So that was hard.
Have you thought about shedding more light publicly onto this? Because I do think that this is an occurrence quite frequently, or have you reached out to volunteer lawyers for the arts, or I would like to, because the photo is part of a series that was taken in that town, and they actually have a small museum. And at one point they said, oh, why don't we own these, it would be great for them to do an exhibit of these photos, but there's no way that they would have the funding to get those photos, which is, again, a depiction of their own town. So it's something that I would like to pursue, but I'm not sure what would be a way to pursue getting the rights to the photo. So interesting. I think also what you said before about, certain stories are preserved and told in the archives, and then they are your stories. And that's why I was also asking if you collaborated with any archives or let's say the New York Historical Society, or some official archives, to insert your projects and your legacy into these archives, because I believe that the archives in general are living spaces, and the stories are shifting and living based on who's selecting the works, who's folding them away based on preference, based on changes in politics in countries and how we perceive the world at a certain time. So I encourage you all to continue. And I was wondering, actually, that's one of my questions that I didn't ask you, what are you doing next with these projects? Is this like a closed chapter? Is it ongoing? Is it still work in progress? Are you moving on to the next project? Are you continuing? Are you inspired by your own work?
For me personally, with this project, with the Legacy Lab project, focusing on Eugenia, one thing I did was, I had mentioned earlier, I wrote a one-act play where I kind of wrote a fictionalized version of kind of a version of me, and me kind of exploring Eugenia and my mother, and not technically rewriting history, but my way of understanding it, and in this lens and in this. But I just want to have the photographs of her. Because I only have photos of her to 16, and one photo of her at 33, which is with my uncle with the hamburger hat. All the other photos of her are, she's like frozen in time as a teenager. So she's had I would say the privilege to see her grow up, and I want to have those photographs so that my mom can see her sister grow up. I saw, to think about when you see someone for the last time, and that's how forever you're going to see them. I didn't realize how much that hits until much later, how much time has passed by. So for me, that's kind of, and it's interesting what you said about not owning those photographs, because I'm the person who has all the photos. If someone can't find a family photograph, they come to me. Do you have this photo of me when I was? Oh yes, I do. Here, come into my library. My grandma's like, do you have that photo of me with the pink? Of course I do. Here it is. But the fact that there's photographs of a family member of mine, multiple photographs, that I can't have access to, or I can't see, or my mom can't see, or even my grandmother can't see. If that's driving me crazy, I can't imagine how that makes them feel. So that's something I'm determined to do. It is a little wary, but it's now or never. And also for me, it's kind of pushed me as a writer and playwriting. And it's kind of been a very cathartic way of exploring my family legacy, which, as we kind of said, when you get, it's not so some of it's great and some of it's a little sad. And then getting to those deep parts, when you process these things, when you open an archive and you process everything that's in it, the good, the bad, the ugly, the great, you know, you kind of open up emotions that you didn't really know you had or were kind of dormant for a bit. And so writing has been really a helpful tool in trying to explore that. So I'm excited to hopefully make that one act into maybe like 2 acts or a full length, but we'll see.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I think this was the first time that I started going into my archives. Oh, and to be able to make anything out of it. With the whole, like I said before, the way that I work is very, very fragmented or compartmentalized. And so I kind of like acquired also our jury papers for when we were going on trial seeking political asylum. So I want to implement those in some way. The flag, the American flag is painted yellow. That's an actual flag that I grew up with in my home. I used to hang it on the roof of my room as a teenager. And it was there when we moved into that house, which was the first house that we owned in America. So I want to keep exploring just different materials and taking all the archive that I saved already and doing kind of like the same thing that I've done over here, but with different mixed media. With archives in general itself, I ended up taking a bookmaking workshop. So I jumped from one workshop to the other. And I'm working on a workshop of my husband and I, and how the time that we spent in our studio apartment is a very small apartment. And so what I want to do is kind of celebrate that time so that hopefully it comes to an end. And you know, and we have a nice piece of nostalgia.
Thank you. I'm not sure if are there any more questions from the audience?
So my question to everyone, whoever chooses to take this question, is how does it feel to be under the banner of an organization that's been around since 1974, encouraging artists to tell their stories without interference from the outside?
Oh my God, it's like so like overwhelmed right now. Well, it's one, I mean, in Foco also, I was an introvert in Foco around the same time I was taking your class. It was my first job. And it was great because City College and in Foco was at the Andrew Freeman Home, which is full circle because I'm currently doing a residency there. And they were one stop away on the D train. So I would go on 145th for class and I'll go to 165th for Foco, and I was like, let's go. And as the years have gone by, I mean, I kind of point to Foco to kind of like my career to where it is because I applied to the fellowship in like 2019. I just started doing photography and I didn't get it, but they were doing the apartment gallery series. And I remember Kim, shout out to Kim, she told me that, she's like, we always encourage people to apply because if you don't, she's like, we don't throw away your artwork. Like everyone who submits, we don't just be like losers and like that. Like no, we look into potential other participations or collaborations. And that stuck with me because I always felt like in the art world when you're applying and you're submitting, you can feel very like tossed to the side when you don't win. And you're just like, oh, like I spent like 3 days on this application and told you my whole life story and I organized everything to the files and the JPEG and the TIFFs. Like, really? And to think about an organization that was really, it really meant with the legacy where they were like, everyone that applied wasn't discarded. There was like, we're gonna see something about your work, or they were opening workshops or like, you know what, maybe this, you know, how to build a career in the arts, how to fund yourself in the arts, how are ways that, you know, the art world is so meticulous and very privileged where if you don't know what this is and that is, you feel like you're gonna fall behind, and they made that accessible. I remember the workshops they were holding, forgetting the name of it, but it was, what was it?
PDI.
That was like, I know, it was like, I remember it, you know, and literally like, and Focus literally has just been the quintessential everything to me and to a lot of other artists as well, just because I really feel like they're the quintessential arts community center Goliath, all of it, just because they're so intertwined and they're so dedicated and they're so passionate about it. Like, I feel like there's bigger words, and I'm like, I can't find them right, because I feel like you guys go beyond those words, especially for young artists, especially for any artist in any wave in their career, because I think where it's so quick where we feel like our legacies tend to be overlooked or modified or censored, and to be somewhere where there's none of that, where where they're actively like, we're gonna let's do a lawsuit, like we gotta do a lawsuit to get your grandmother's photo. God damn it, like go do the lawsuit. Like, it's like that passion, like, no, like, why don't you have access to like, that's your grandmother, that's just your family, that's just your blood, like, and how photography has very the scope of like, what are you photographing? Who are you photographing it? What are your intentions with your photographs? Is this coming from a place of sincerity, or what is your what's the word I'm looking for? Why are you photographing? Is this because you want to document something that you love, or something you don't want to lose? Or you're not just trying to like cash in, whereas people are like, oh, this is the different, this is exotic. That's not like exotic. I feel like a lot of our stories got pushed into the exotic, where it was like, oh, you're in the Bronx, you're Latino, you're queer, this and that, where there was these buzzwords, and there was like these cheap imitations of our actual stories. And I don't know, man, this is just a ramble behind Foco. I just love you guys. And I just, Marisol, this is crazy. Like, I literally haven't seen you since like 2020. It's been 6 years. I know we follow each other like on Facebook, but like, this is different. And just like, I remember, I think when you said about photographing what you know and who you are, like, I remember a conversation we had at Tides Back in Foco about like being like a woman photographer, and like what being a photographer as a woman. And Sofie Rivera, who's like an icon in Foco's history. I think in the first issue, her photographs is the cover page. And just a lot of like our histories get buried, a lot of histories get overlooked. And I feel like that was a conversation we had 6 years ago, and now 6 years later, I feel there's been so many female and femme women photographers, and Foco has brought to light, that I've met and been introduced to, and they're just continuing that. And I just feel like that's a legacy that I'm proud to be a part of. Sorry for rambling, guys. I'm just like really like overwhelmed right now.
I just want to say, Marisol, I did not recognize you. So I just gotta say I'm so grateful, because when I first decided to pursue art and photography in itself, I had come from like a commercial background as a producer. And what I was doing was photographing, assisting in productions for like fashion stuff. And that's what kind of made me want to not do that anymore, was the fact that I didn't want to make more money for white people. Like, I would see how I was getting paid a misery, and at the end of the day, none of this was given back to not even my soul, but to like my community. So, and Foco was the first thing that I applied to. The Bronx River Art Center was the first arts organization that opened their doors for me. And then I applied on Foco, and it was the first W that I got. It was the first time that I felt like, okay, maybe this is something that maybe this is a gift that I could pursue. And I applied with the photos of my friends in Oaxaca that are part of the third gender. And I never, we live in a world where I still apply to many things with that project, but you don't hear anything back, because it's not what people are expected to. Like you said, they want to see your misery. They live to see you miserable. But whenever you tell your own stories, they don't understand that. And I think that's the greatness that the arts community in the Bronx, including in Foco, and the work of Oscar and everybody there, that they're willing to back you up and open their doors to your stories, for you to tell them yourself.
And that's beautiful work, by the way. I guess goosebumps when I think.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I encourage anybody that has any opportunity, even if you don't think of yourself as an artist, you have that part of your brain that wants to create. So workshops like this, workshops in organizations throughout the Bronx are probably the best way for you to be able to have that process of creativity.
I want to add, to even be invited to be in dialogue with artists from the Bronx and the Bronx community is such such an honor and has been such a great experience for me. And I want to thank you all for sharing your stories, your vulnerability, your generosity, your creativity, all of that. Perhaps we can close this evening or this formal part, I should say, of the evening.